The sun was ruthless at midday, baking the two-lane highway that cut through the edge of town. Heat shimmered off the asphalt, making the air dance like a mirage. A battered old motorcycle stood at an awkward angle on the shoulder, its frame trembling with a cough of smoke and noise. Beside it, Tom Reed, a man of 79, in a faded denim jacket and scuffed boots, wiped sweat from his brow with a trembling hand. His fingers, worn from years of work and war, struggled with the stubborn kickstand as the bike hissed and sputtered. Traffic slowed as drivers glanced at the spectacle. An old man, a broken-down machine, smoke curling into the bright sky. Then the sharp bark of a siren split the heavy air. A patrol car rolled up fast, tires crunching gravel. The door slammed open. A blonde officer stepped out, tall, crisp uniform gleaming, mirrored sunglasses hiding her eyes. Her voice cut through the scene, loud enough for passing cars to hear. "Sir, what exactly do you think you're doing blocking this road?" Her tone dripped with authority and impatience. She didn't wait for an answer, stepping closer, one hand hovering near her belt. Tom stayed still, breathing slow. His face was lined but calm, eyes hidden beneath the brim of his hat. The motorcycle coughed again, smoke rising like a signal. Somewhere far off, barely noticeable beneath the tension, came the low hum of many engines. The sound of something approaching, but no one on the roadside noticed yet. A car slowed. A window rolled down. A bystander watched. The blonde officer's voice rose again. "You need to move this junk, now." The morning had started before the sun had fully crested the horizon. A soft mist clung to the low fields behind Tom Reed's small house, the kind of house that had been built solid and plain, meant to outlast the man who lived in it. The air smelled of damp earth and old wood. Inside the garage, the scent changed. Motor oil, rust, gasoline, and the faint tang of sweat. Tom's hands, calloused and steady despite the faint tremor age had brought, worked over the engine of his motorcycle with quiet determination. The bike was older than many of the cars that sped past his home each day. A 1972 Harley-Davidson, scarred and patched, but loyal. Tools lay arranged with soldierly precision on a workbench stained by decades of use. A photograph, taped to the cabinet above, showed 4 young men in desert fatigues, grinning despite the dust and the heat. One of them was Tom, thinner, dark-haired, eyes bright with youth and purpose. He paused, wiping his palms on an old rag. The bike's engine gave a reluctant cough as he tested the ignition, then fell silent. Outside, the sky brightened, painting the fields in pale gold. The day had meaning. It was Flag Day, and Tom had made this ride for as long as he could remember. A stop at the cemetery, a visit to the memorial downtown, a quiet nod to the ones who hadn't made it back. The bike was part of that ritual, as sacred as the flag pin he fastened to his jacket before every ride. The Harley groaned as he rolled it out onto the gravel, the metal frame protesting beneath his grip. The tires crunched over loose stone, and for a moment, Tom allowed himself a small smile. The machine was no beauty, not anymore, but it carried him where he needed to go. The ride started well enough. The wind cooled his face as he took the back road into town, the fields rolling past in shades of green and brown. The bike's engine rumbled low, steady like an old friend's voice. But halfway to the highway, the first sputter came. Then another. The engine coughed, choked, and belched a plume of smoke that stung Tom's eyes. He eased the bike to the shoulder, boots scraping the hot gravel. The engine ticked as it cooled, the smell of burnt oil mixing with the acrid smoke. Tom swung his leg over the seat, knelt down, and examined the engine casing. His fingers brushed the metal, warm and uncooperative. The hum of traffic swelled nearby, the world passing him by in waves of speed and noise. He wiped his brow again, feeling the grit of the road on his skin. The bike had failed him at the worst possible spot. But Tom Reed didn't curse or slam a fist against the metal. He simply stood, straightened his back, and began working the kickstand loose, one slow breath at a time. In that quiet, with the sun climbing higher and the road stretching empty before him, the first memory stirred. A ghost rising from the heat and smoke, the taste of dust, the whine of a stalled engine, the distant echo of gunfire. Tom had been here before, in a place far from home, in a moment where failure had cost more than time. The heat was a living thing in the desert that day, pressing against skin and bone, filling every breath with grit and fire. The sky above was an endless, merciless white. The sun a pale disk that gave no comfort, only glare. The world seemed made of nothing but sand and rock and heat haze that twisted the horizon into strange shapes. The Humvee sat half-buried in the loose sand at the edge of a narrow wadi, its hood raised like a wounded beast trying to gasp for air. Tom Reed crouched beside it, sweat running into his eyes, stinging, blinding. His hands moved fast, instinct guiding him as he worked at the engine, fingers searching for the source of the failure. The engine had died at the worst possible time. The convoy was miles ahead, and behind them, too close for comfort, came the low, rattling growl of enemy vehicles. A sandstorm brewed on the horizon, dark and roiling, like smoke rising from the land itself. The air smelled of oil, of burnt rubber, of fear. The Humvee's radio crackled with static, broken by the voice of their lieutenant calling out positions, calling for updates, calling for a miracle. Tom's heart pounded in his ears, louder than the wind that began to howl through the wadi. His uniform clung to him, soaked through, heavy with dust and sweat. He wiped his hands on his trousers, leaving black smears where grease mixed with blood from a gash on his forearm he hadn't noticed. Beside him, Mick, big, broad-shouldered, always ready with a joke, stood watch, his rifle raised, eyes scanning the ridge for movement. His breath came in short bursts, his face pale beneath the grime. He said nothing, but Tom could feel the weight of his trust, the silent plea that whatever was broken would be fixed, and fast. The engine refused to answer. Tom's fingers found the cracked hose, the loosened belt, the failure that had brought them to this terrible stop. He worked without thought of the enemy or the storm or the taste of fear on his tongue. Only the machine mattered, and it was failing them, inch by inch, heartbeat by heartbeat. Then came the sound, sharp, unmistakable, the first crack of a rifle shot. A round smacked into the hood of the Humvee, sending a plume of dust and metal shavings into the air. Another round whined past Tom's ear, close enough to feel the air break around it. Mick opened fire, steady, measured, his voice low and fierce as he called out targets Tom could not see. Time slowed. The world became sound and heat and the bitter taste of helplessness. Tom tried one last time, slamming the hood closed, twisting the key in the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, died. The radio gave only static. A burst of gunfire struck too close. Mick stumbled, caught in the open, and fell to one knee. His eyes met Tom's, wide, urgent. Tom moved toward him, but another shot rang out, and Mick dropped, hard, the dust rising around him like a shroud. Tom froze, the weight of the moment crushing him. The wind roared. The sandstorm swallowed the sun. The engine was silent. The world was silent, except for the enemy's approach and the sound of his own ragged breath. He dragged Mick behind the Humvee, hands shaking, heart breaking. He tried to speak, to offer comfort, but the words would not come. The storm took the sound of his voice, and the desert took his friend. The memory faded, but the smell of burning oil remained. The officer's voice rang out again, sharp and impatient. Tom blinked against the sunlight on the highway. The past and present tangled together, both marked by the failure of an engine, both shadowed by loss. The highway shimmered in the heat, a wavering ribbon of asphalt stretching toward the town's edge. The motorcycle sat silent now, the smoke thinning but still rising in faint wisps that caught the sunlight like ghostly signals. Tom Reed stood beside it, his boots planted firm on the shoulder's loose gravel. The brim of his hat cast a narrow shadow over his lined face. His hands, those same hands that once gripped a wrench in a desert storm, rested open at his sides, empty, calm. The officer stepped closer, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each impatient stride. The glare of her mirrored sunglasses reflected Tom's figure. Small, alone, dwarfed by the vastness of the road and the harshness of the day. Her jaw was tight, her posture stiff with authority. "I said move it! You're obstructing traffic! You're creating a hazard!" she snapped, her voice loud enough that a passing pickup slowed to glance at the scene. Tom met her words with a quiet that only seemed to irritate her further. He drew in a slow breath, the smell of hot oil and scorched rubber filling his lungs. His voice, when it came, was steady but worn, like a flag faded by too many suns. "I'm trying, ma'am. The bike won't start." She folded her arms across her chest, the weight of her badge and belt heavy on her frame, and gestured toward her cruiser. The tow truck, already called, rumbled into view from behind, its yellow lights flashing in the stark noon brightness. "This relic should have been scrapped before I was born," she said, half to herself, half to the small but growing audience that had begun to gather. A couple of teenagers lingered at the edge of a gas station lot. An older man leaned on his cane outside the hardware store. Phones appeared in hands, not yet raised but ready. Tom's gaze drifted toward the tow truck. The memory of another engine that had failed at a moment of need weighed on him, heavy as the desert sun. He swallowed against the dryness in his throat, tasting dust and the bitter edge of shame that did not belong to him. Her partner approached now, younger, his expression a mixture of amusement and boredom. He circled the motorcycle as if inspecting a relic at a museum, his fingers brushing the rusted chrome with a kind of detached curiosity. "Plates are expired," he noted, though the sticker was barely a month out of date, the kind of oversight that drew a warning, not a scene. The tow truck driver stepped down from his cab, adjusting his cap against the sun, looking between Tom and the officers, unsure if he was interrupting something larger than the task he'd been sent for. Tom kept his voice low. "There's no need for this," he said. The blonde officer's jaw clenched. Her voice rose again, hard enough to carry over the hum of traffic. "You're resisting orders. That's a citation. If you don't step away, I'll have to detain you for endangering the public." A murmur rippled through the small crowd. The shopkeeper at the corner, a man with a veteran's cap pulled low, took a step closer, his brow furrowed in quiet concern. The tow truck's chain clinked as it was hooked to the motorcycle's frame. Tom watched the machine that had carried him through years of remembrance, that had been as much companion as vehicle, as it was prepared to be hauled off like scrap. The rumble on the horizon grew louder now, a deep, steady thrum that vibrated through the ground. The officer didn't notice. Her focus was narrow, fixed on enforcing a rule that had already slipped beyond reason. Tom closed his eyes for the briefest moment, and the sound became the echo of distant engines in the desert, the roar of a storm, the loss of a friend. When he opened them, the present remained, harsh and bright, but the air seemed to shift, as if the road itself was about to bear witness. The noise was no longer just traffic, it was something else, something coming. The low hum on the horizon thickened, no longer a faint murmur beneath the chatter of engines and voices, but a steady drumbeat that rolled across the land like distant thunder. The ground seemed to tremble beneath Tom's boots, the vibrations rising through the soles, through the dust, through the years. Officer Rachel Monroe's voice cracked the moment like a whip. "I said step back. Now." Her hand hovered near her holster, fingers tense, her jaw tight as stone. The younger officer, Anthony Price, shifted uncomfortably at her side. His glance flicked between Tom and the sound drawing near, the certainty draining from his stance. The first of them appeared as dark shapes in the heat shimmer, then another, then more. Motorcycles, at least 20, then trucks, then cars. From each vehicle flew flags, the stars and stripes snapping bold against the pale sky, banners honoring prisoners of war and those missing in action streaming beneath them, black and white against the sunlit road. The convoy moved as one, steady and sure, filling the highway in a formation born of purpose, not parade. Their engines rumbled deep, a rolling voice that silenced the onlookers. Rachel Monroe felt her breath catch, as the convoy drew close. She recognized the man who rode at the head of the group before he even removed his helmet. Samuel Hart, a man whose hand had rested on her father's shoulder in comfort the day of his funeral. A man who had spoken quietly at the memorial, whose voice had steadied her mother's trembling one in the darkest hour. A man who had served in Vietnam, retired as a master sergeant, and had led this flag convoy for over a decade in honor of fallen comrades. Samuel brought his motorcycle to a halt, the chrome glinting beneath the sun. He swung his leg over with the ease of a younger man, his back straight, his eyes clear beneath silver brows. The riders behind him eased their machines to a stop, forming a line of engines and flags that turned the road into a corridor of honor. The crowd that had gathered fell silent. Phones rose, but now as witnesses, not voyeurs. Samuel's boots met the ground with quiet finality. He removed his helmet, tucking it under one arm, and stepped forward. His gaze swept over Tom Reed, over the motorcycle hooked to the tow truck's chain, over Rachel Monroe and Anthony Price, over the faces watching. His eyes, when they met Tom's, softened in recognition. "Tom Reed," he said, his voice carrying with it the warmth of old respect. "I figured we'd see you out here today." Tom straightened, the burden of the moment lifting just enough to draw a breath without weight. Samuel turned his attention to the officers. "Is there a problem here?" Rachel's confidence faltered. The authority in Samuel's voice was not loud, not forceful, but it bore the weight of a lifetime of service and community standing. Officer Price and I were just addressing a hazard on the road," she said. But even to her own ears, the words sounded thin. Samuel glanced at the hooked motorcycle, at Tom's steady posture. "This man's no hazard. He's one of the reasons we get to fly these flags." The wind tugged at the banners, making them snap and ripple, bright and solemn above the gathered machines. The tow truck driver, a young man with nervous eyes, stepped back from the chain, his hands raised slightly as if to say he wanted no part of what was unfolding. The other riders dismounted slowly, respectfully. Men and women of different ages, all bound by shared service or the memory of those who had served. Some wore leather vests, bearing patches of their units. Others bore nothing but quiet resolve. All stood in silent solidarity, a wall of witness and protection. Rachel Monroe felt the heat on her face now. It was not just the sun. She saw her own reflection in Samuel's gaze, saw herself as others must have seen her in that moment, and it stung. The highway seemed to hold its breath. Engines idled low, a steady hum beneath the sudden quiet that had fallen over the scene. The flags of the convoy rippled in the breeze, bold against the stark blue of the noon sky. The weight of what had unfolded settled over the gathering like a solemn oath. Rachel Monroe felt it first. The shift in the air, the eyes of the townsfolk, the riders and the onlookers, turned toward her, not with the deference she was accustomed to, but with questioning, with quiet reproach. She straightened her shoulders, but the authority she tried to summon felt hollow beneath the gaze of Samuel Hart and the wall of flag-bearers standing behind him. Tom Reed stood quietly, saying nothing. There was no accusation in his eyes, no triumph in his stance. Only the steady dignity of a man who had seen the world at its worst and still chosen to stand tall. His motorcycle remained tethered to the tow truck's hook, but now the chain seemed to symbolize something else entirely. The weight of injustice, ready to be lifted. Samuel Hart took another step forward, his boots scuffing the gravel. His voice was measured, calm and resolute. "Rachel, I knew your father," he said, his words carrying to the edges of the gathering. "He taught you better than this." A flush rose in Rachel's cheeks, the sun no longer an excuse for the heat she felt. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Anthony Price shifted beside her, his gaze lowered, his posture uneasy, as if trying to shrink from the moment. The crowd began to murmur, a tide of quiet voices, not jeering but reflecting the weight of the lesson unfolding before them. The shopkeeper with the veteran's cap nodded once, solemn and approving. The teenagers who had lingered earlier now watched with a new respect, their phones forgotten at their sides. Samuel glanced at the tow truck driver, who swallowed hard and unhooked the chain from Tom's motorcycle without waiting for an order. The clink of the metal hitting the ground was like the end of a sentence. Rachel found her voice at last, though it was smaller than before. I didn't realize. I was trying to do my job. Samuel's expression softened, but his words remained firm. Your job is to serve and protect. This man has done that for you, long before you wore that badge. Tom lifted his gaze then, and for the first time, he spoke directly to Rachel. His voice was quiet, but carried across the hush. I didn't ask for special treatment, just a little patience. Those words seemed to cut deeper than any rebuke. Rachel nodded, the weight of them settling on her shoulders like the sun's heat. The convoy remained still, a living monument to the moment, their flags snapping in the breeze. The townsfolk stood as witnesses, their silence a kind of tribute, their presence a quiet reminder that respect, once given, must be honored. Samuel turned, his voice carrying one final truth to bind the lesson in the hearts of all who heard. We're all just passing through, Rachel. What matters is how we treat those who walked the road before us. The convoy leader's words lingered as the wind carried the sound of the flags, a chorus of cloth and memory, of sacrifice, and the dignity earned through service. The air shifted, as if the road itself had exhaled. The tension that had gripped the scene eased with the clink of the tow chain lying forgotten on the ground. The convoy's flags caught the breeze fully now, their fabric cracking like small bursts of thunder, their colors bright and fierce against the midday sky. Rachel Monroe lowered her gaze, the weight of the moment pressing heavier than her badge or uniform ever had. She took a step forward, boots crunching the gravel, her voice unsteady but clear enough to carry. Mr. Reed, I owe you an apology. I was wrong. I didn't see you for who you are. I didn't listen. Tom Reed stood quietly, the sun casting his long shadow across the hot asphalt. He studied her, not with bitterness or pride, but with the quiet measure of a man who had learned long ago that real strength often lay in forgiveness. I appreciate that, Officer Monroe, he said, his voice low but firm, like the steady beat of a drum far off in the hills. Samuel Hart stepped beside Tom then, placing a hand lightly on the older man's shoulder, the gesture unspoken camaraderie, an acknowledgement of shared battles and burdens carried. Tom, Samuel said, why don't you ride with us today? Be our honored guest. For a heartbeat, Tom hesitated, his gaze drifting to the motorcycle that had so faithfully carried him on this journey year after year. Its frame bore the scars of age and miles, and today it had faltered. But as he looked upon the line of motorcycles, trucks, and cars, as he saw the flags and the faces of those who had come not just to ride, but to bear witness, he felt the weight of the invitation. I'd be honored, Tom said simply. The tow truck driver, young and contrite, opened the passenger door of his cab without a word, helping Tom climb aboard with hands that were gentle now, no longer part of the problem, but part of the solution. The crowd watched as Tom was settled into the lead truck of the convoy, Samuel at the wheel. The engine roared to life, a sound not of machinery alone, but of purpose regained, of dignity restored. A slow, respectful clap began, soft at first from the shopkeeper at the corner, then joined by the teenagers, by the bystanders, until the highway echoed with the sound of hands meeting in tribute. Rachel Monroe stepped back, the lesson etched into her heart as surely as the sun marked the day. Anthony Price joined her, both watching as the convoy began to roll forward, a river of engines and flags flowing down the highway, Tom Reed riding at the front, where he had always belonged. And above them all, the banners flew, the stars and stripes, bold and proud, and beneath them the black and white of the prisoner of war and missing in action flags, a reminder that some roads are still unfinished, that some journeys are still waiting for their return. The highway stretched ahead, a ribbon of sunlit road framed by fields and scattered trees, the sky vast and endless above. The convoy moved as one, motorcycles, trucks, and cars bearing flags that snapped in the breeze, like the voices of those who could no longer speak. The sound of the engines was steady, like a heartbeat shared among them, a rhythm of unity, of purpose. Inside the lead truck, Tom Reed sat quietly, his hands resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. The heat no longer pressed upon him like a weight. The burden of the morning's humiliation had lifted, carried away by the convoy's silent promise of respect. The wind streamed through the open window, bringing with it the clean scent of sun-warmed earth, of grass, of freedom. His eyes misted as he watched the flags ripple, the stars and stripes bold and bright, the banners honoring prisoners of war and those missing in action flowing beneath, black and white against the blue of the sky. A memory stirred, unbidden but welcome. A road in another land, long ago. A temporary base in a stretch of desert. A makeshift flagpole where the stars and stripes had been raised over the dust and danger. Men stood beneath it, weary but unbroken, their faces drawn, but their spirits lifted by that small, defiant symbol of home. One man had not made it to that moment, his absence a shadow that had never quite left Tom's heart. Tom spoke softly, his words carried away by the wind, but meant for those who would hear them. A flag's just cloth, until you see the price paid for it. Samuel glanced at him, nodded once. Nothing more needed to be said. The convoy rolled on, the sound of the engines merging with the wind, with the memory of all who had come before, with the promise of those who would remember. The townsfolk watched from the roadside as the procession passed, their applause fading into quiet respect, their faces solemn, their hearts full. The road bore the weight of the moment, then gave it back as strength to those who had witnessed it. Today we remember. Always forward. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you are watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.